Grace and peace, grace and peace. Rev C here, continuing our study on the attributes of God. Continuing our study on the attributes of God, theology proper. And we've covered the classifications, we've covered um, the self existent name of God, Yahweh, his covenant. We talked about his covenant faithfulness. So now we are going to tackle holiness. We're laying the foundation before we get into uh, some deeper individual attributes. So we're looking at the holiness of God. So Exodus chapter 3, we know, is the calling of Moses. God is calling Moses. He's getting ready to commission him to go talk to Pharaoh. And so when Moses approaches the burning bush, notice in verse 5, God tells him, don't come any closer. Then he said to him, do not come near here. Don't come any closer. Remove your sandals from your feet. Why? For the place on which you are standing is holy ground. The place on which you are standing is holy ground. Moses stood on holy ground because he was in the presence of the holy God. Moses is standing on holy ground because he's standing in the presence of the holy God. And this is the first reference to God's holiness in the Bible. God's holiness in the Bible, that kadosh there. And how did Moses respond? The same way that we should respond. Then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Moses responded with reverent fear. He responds with reverential fear and awe of this holy God. God then reveals his name, Yahweh, the tetragrammaton. We talked about that. God is clearly communicating to Moses and to us that the great I am is the Holy One. The great I am is the Holy One. And we see again in Exodus 15, verse 11, that again, God's name and his holiness meet. God's name and his holiness meet. We see that Exodus 15:11. Who is like you among the gods, Yahweh? Who is like you? Majestic in holiness. Majestic in holiness. Fearsome in praises, working wonders. So again, the name and God's holiness meet together. So when we study and meditate on God's name, that should lead us to meditate on God's holiness. When we meditate on God's name, that causes us to meditate on God's holiness. So, where, when, and to whom God reveals himself as the Lord, his presence sets apart that particular space, time, and people as holiness. But also, God calls us to holiness. God calls us, his people, to holiness. Leviticus 11:44 and 45. For I am Yahweh your God. Therefore, set yourselves apart as holy. Be kadosh, be holy, for I am holy. Verse 45, for I am Yahweh who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. Thus you shall be holy, for I am holy. God calls his people to holiness. The priests, they must not profane his holy name. We see that again in Leviticus. Holiness is the only attribute of God that is repeated 3 times like that. We see it in Isaiah 6 and we see it in Revelation chapter 4. Holy, holy, holy. But also we see that God's holiness, it it qualifies, it describes all his other attributes. It is an attribute of attributes, we could say. God's holiness is an attribute of attributes. So we think of God's holy power, holy truth, holy love, holy omniscience, holy omnipresence, holy wrath. Holiness describes and qualifies all the other attributes. Now, what do we mean by holy? There's two. We have the Greek word, and then the Hebrew word for holiness. The Greek and the Hebrew, hagios and kadosh. It's holy. They form a word family, word group that means uh, holiness, sanctification, sacred. It stands apart. It's separated from what is common. That is what hagios and kadosh mean. They're separated, stand apart. So the foundation of this doctrine is the Old Testament. It's laid in the Old Testament. Over and over again, we see the phrase, the Holy One of Israel. Isaiah uses that title multiple times. That he is the Holy One of Israel. So, this deals with purity of God's people and purity of God. Now, this root word, kadosh, originally means to be set apart, to be separated. God is therefore called the Holy One because he exists in himself. He exists in himself. And nothing can be compared to him. He is distinct. He is unique. He is distinct, unique. So, the scriptures speak of God's holiness as his transcendently august and venerable majesty, his moral purity. Holiness is the shining of all his perfections. There, we see terms like majestic holiness, ethical holiness, moral excellence. God is absolutely distinct from all his creatures. He is exalted above them in infinite majesty. God's holiness, then, is God's capacity and his right to arouse our reverent awe and wonder. It is his uniqueness. His holiness is ethical as well as metaphysical. The holiness of God calls attention to all that God is. The holiness of God calls attention to all that God is. So, if we could give a summary definition of holiness, it would be that God is set apart. Get this on the screen for us. So, holiness is that God is set apart by his glory. God is set apart by his glory for his glory. God is set apart by his glory and for his glory. He's holy, speaking of the ontological aspect of God, how he exists, his being. He is set apart by his holiness. He is holy because of who he is as God. He is holy because that's who he is. That's his nature. And we've seen God's majestic holiness. He's incomparable. He is incomparable. He is unique. Then we look at God's moral holiness, his character, his everything about him is holy. So this is his virtue. We speak of his virtue, his moral perfection. Holiness, then, in speaking of his moral holiness, when we speak of God's moral holiness, speaking of God's moral holiness, this denotes his separation and his supremacy, or his supreme set apartness. This is God's supreme set apartness, his total dedication to his own glory. So, the moral holiness of God is the absolute righteousness of his whole nature. That's his beauty of all of his attributes together. The beauty of all his attributes together. God is holy. He calls us to be holy. We worship him because of his holiness. God is holy. He commands his people to be holy. And so the last verse passage I want us to explore together, the last passage I want us to look at together is Psalm 99. Psalm 99. Psalm 99. It says, Yahweh reigns. Present tense. He is currently reigning. Let the people tremble. He sits enthroned above the cherubim. Let the earth quake. Yahweh is great in Zion. He is exalted above all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he. Holy is he. The strength of the king loves justice. You have established equity. You have done justice and righteousness in Jacob. Exalt Yahweh your God and worship at the footstool of his feet. Holy is he. And it goes on. Moses and Aaron were priests. Down to verse 9. Exalt Yahweh our God. Worship him. Lift him up. Magnify him. Worship at his holy mountain. For holy is Yahweh our God. He is holy. Well, this is Rev C saying God bless you, God keep you. I'll see you on the next video.